Mabuhay! We are the third group and we will be discussing the tourism and hospitality during the Industrial and French Revolution. Before we start, let me introduce to you my team. Next slide. I am John Paul Saclolo.
I'm Iris Salas.
And I am Katin Rodrigo.
Next.
In the late 1700s, most people worked in the fields on land they did not own. Those who owned the land, called aristocrats, lived refined lives in elegant manor houses. Servants raised their children and did their housework. The landowners and the people who worked for them depended upon each other. It was a system that had existed for centuries. In towns across England and the United States, a series of extraordinary innovations would alter the way people lived and worked for the next 150 years. Inventors had found new ways to harness nature's energy. They built new kinds of machines powered by water, steam, and coal. The new machines replaced hand-powered tools. They did the same work, only cheaper and faster. Much of the work was done outside the home, in specially designed buildings, the first factories. Mechanization began in the textile mills of England, where one machine attached to a spinning wheel could do the work of 50 people. Fuel, clothing, and food all became more affordable. With the development of locomotives and steamboats, manufactured goods could now be sold halfway around the world. Families moved from the villages of their ancestors to new industrial towns. And a new class of people emerged, workers who produced goods. Industrialists, the people who owned the factories, employed hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. And they made enormous profits in their industrial centers. But while the Industrial Revolution brought wealth to some and jobs for others, it came with a price tag. Pollution from coal-powered factories turned the cities black. Lack of housing created the first urban slums. And the demand for more and more goods and higher profits brought the exploitation of workers, including children. Some of the worst conditions were seen in the textile mills of New England. In the 1830s, a 10-year-old mill girl described her life.
We were paid $2 a week, and the working hours of all the girls extended from 5 o'clock in the morning till 7 in the evening, with 1.5 hour for breakfast and for dinner.
It was the hiring of children, some as young as 5 years old, throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, that outraged the public. Workers and reformers protested. They formed unions and associations and fought for government regulations to limit the workday and protect children. These laws helped address many of the abuses brought on by the Industrial Revolution. Today, we are in the middle of another revolution, a technological revolution. We live in what's called the global village, because we can connect with people around the world as if they lived next door. And we can now work anytime and anywhere. We will have to wait and see where this new revolution leads.
Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a period of scientific and technological development in the 18th century that transformed largely rural, agrarian societies, especially in Europe and North America, into industrialized urban ones. Next. So I will be discussing tourism during industrial. By the 18th century, this custom was widespread among wealthier classes, and it spread to other parts of the world, such as America. Similarly, religious pilgrimage that were already popular during the Middle Ages continued during this period. The Industrial Revolution, which began in the second half of the 18th century, produced a major economic, social, and technological transformation that will be spread to the rest of the world. As a, as a result of these changes, there was an exodus from rural regions to growing big cities which needed labor for the new industry. Religious pilgrimage. Pilgrimage tourism is the type of tourism that entirely or powerfully motivates pilgrims towards the achievement of religious attitudes and practices. Next. The 19th century saw the creation of the travel agencies. One of the pioneers was Thomas Cook and Son, which was the first to offer excursions and holiday for group, which included transport, accommodation, and food tickets, this making costs cheaper. This would be the origin of what we know as package holiday. Thomas Cook and Son. Thomas Cook, innovator of the conducted tour, organized his first one-day rail trip in 1841 and 1860s with his son John Mason Cook, created Thomas and Son brand by opening office in London to sell tickets for domestic and international travel. In the half of 20th century, the tourism industry continued to grow thanks to the mass production of buses and cars. Coastal tourism began to gain importance and after World War II, the Mediterranean coast quickly grew in popularity. Also, improvements in the in air transport, charter flights, as well as progress in labor legislation and the growth in social welfare lead to a boom in tourism. Mediterranean. The term Mediterranean derives from the Latin me- Mediterraneus, inland, medius, middle, terra, land, earth. In Greek, miso, misogyous. The tourism sector suffers a recession during the 1970s, mainly due to the energy crisis, leading to lower costs and prices. That's when mass tourism emerged. Traveling went from being something only for an exclusive group to become a leisure activity with the reach of many. Tourism not only impacts the local economy, but it is also starting to affect the social structures, culture, and lifestyle of the destination visited. Therefore, the challenge now is to provide solution by developing a tourism awareness that is respectful with environment and the local way of living of its inhabitants. Next po. Hospitality during industrial. The hospitality industry benefited immensely from the Industrial Revolution approx 1760 to 1840, which gradually changed the idea of long-distance travel with the construction of roads and railway networks. To accommodate a large influx of travelers, new hotels were built in nearly every major trade center or town. Next, the origin of hotels from its childhood of the modern era. A few hundred years back, when modern civilizations began to emerge, no hotels existed and travelers had not to live at the mercy of local people. Slowly, over time, inns and taverns appeared in some of Europe's major trade centers. These rooms weren't the most comfortable back then, but they provide a much needed shelter to weary travelers. The main idea of hosting guests of a mainstream level actually did not exist until the late 18th century when public transportation began to improve and larger number of people were able to travel across greater distances. The next reporter is Miss Sales.
We can define the French Revolution as a social and political conflict that broke out in France in 1789. It pitted the privileged groups against the underprivileged. This event was the beginning of the end of the old regime in Europe, as we have explained in previous videos.
Nobody disputes that the French Revolution was much more important than any other revolution of its contemporaries. But why? First of all, it happened in France, the largest, most powerful, and most populous state in Europe. The French Revolution was also a social revolution since groups such as women, sans-culottes, peasants, and the bourgeoisie participated. They all shared one goal: freedom or death. Also, it was the most radical. In addition to the executions of the royal family, 50,000 people were executed during these years. Finally, it was a universal revolution, since his ideas spread throughout Europe, America, and Asia. For all this, we can conclude that the conflict between the old regime and the new social order was more exact, representative, and sharp in France than anywhere else.
Finally, the classic stages of the French Revolution are the constitutional monarchy, the First French Republic, and the Napoleonic stage.
Thank you, Mr. Sacololo. The French Revolution began in 1789 and lasted until 1794. King Louis XVI needed more money, but had failed to raise more taxes when he had called a meeting of the Estates General. This instead turned into protests about conditions in France. Next. Tourism during French Revolution. Next. The latter half of the 18th century has seen an increase in tourism as a means of enjoyment. Now, women and families are traveling abroad with their husbands in addition to young gentlemen furthering their education. Enjoyment and leisure has also become a prime motive for travel. In travel writing, the depiction of landscape has evolved into a feature that gains the interest of the contemporary reader. The stagecoach network has developed to an optimal level, now providing an easier, safer, and more convenient means of transportation while on the continent. Next. Tourism in the last decade of the 18th century increased as a result of the changing political and economic state of the European continent. Following a series of internal wars in varying countries, European nations became more accessible, safer, and connected through the well-developed stagecoach system and the improving road condition. Next. French Revolutionary Culture. The ideas and values of the French Revolution were reflected in the visual arts, literature, music, and dress. French revolutionary culture was dominated by ideas of nationalism, progress, social unity, and egalitarianism. These cultural symbols were used both in express ideas or values and demonstrate one's loyalty to the revolution. The French Revolution was not only a political and ideological movement, its ideas and values were also expressed in a variety of ways, including through symbolism, art, fashion, and music. Next. Symbols of revolution. One of the most famous symbols of French revolutionary culture was the cockade, a tie knot of color ribbons that was pinned to one's hat, tunic, lapel, or sleeve. Cockades were a common device worn in the 18th century. Their colors were usually chosen to display one's loyalty to a particular ruler, military leader, or political group. The revolution was heavy with symbolism. Many, like the tricolor cockades and flag, were unique to France. Others were borrowed from ancient and classical symbolism in the American Revolution. Next. When Louis XVI returned to Paris on July 17, 1789, 3 days after the fall of the Bastille, he volunteered to wear a cockade of red and blue, the color of Paris, to show his loyalty to the city. The traditional white of the Bourbon monarchy was added shortly after, reportedly by the Marquis de Lafayette, former the forming the famous tricolor or tricolor cockade. Next. Liberty and revolutionary culture. French revolutionary culture also borrows symbols from classical mythology, the Enlightenment and the American Revolution. One of the most famous was the bonnet rug or Liberty Cup. The symbol derived from the ancient Phrygian cup given to liberated slaves, had been used extensively during the American Revolution. A brimless bonnet of red wool or felt. The Liberty Cup symbolized freedom given to oppressed people. It was mainly worn by urban working classes, particularly during the radical phase of the Revolution. The symbology of the French Revolution also used human figures. The best known was Marianne's. As you can see on the picture, it was Marianne, a female personification of French nation not dissimilar to Britannia or Britain or Lady Liberty in United States. Marianne was a young woman who depicted the new republic, a symbol of youth, regeneration, and virtue. Next. As you can see in the picture, it was Jacques Louis David. The Revolution most famous artist was Jacques Louis David, who sat in the National Convention, coordinated Jacobin Festival and painted works like the Tennis Court Oath and the evocated but propagandistic death of Marat. Next. So as you can see in the picture, it was the revolutionary dress that were by the French people. Next. Revolutionary dress. The culture of the French Revolution was not confined to high art. The events of the 1789 to 1793 also changed how people live, dress, and spoke. Shift in fashion were a noticeable outcome of the revolution. The ornate costume of the aristocracy and haute bourgeoisie, a trapping of wealth and extravagance, had largely disappeared by 1791. The revolution had an impact on the way that people dress. The ornate costume and hairstyle of the aristocracy were abandoned in favor of simpler forms of dress. It became fashionable to mimic the dress of the sans culottes. Next. Revolutionary language. The revolution also changed the way that individuals communicated with each other. The Paris and other cities and towns, traditional form of address such as Sire, Monsieur, and Madame were largely abandoned. The more egalitarian citoyen and citoyenne were used in their place. Citizens abandoned the culture of formalities of revolutionary society, including bows, curtsies, and genuflection in the doffing of hats. Next. Revolutionary music. The culture of the French Revolution also included its own soundtrack. The ideas of enlightenment and the revolutionary struggle were incorporated into poetry and song. One of the first revolutionary songs was Caira, French for It Will Be Fine, which appeared in the spring of 1790. The lyrics of Caira were optimistic and initially moderate, praising the National Assembly and the Marquis de Lafayette, but like the revolution itself, they changed over time, becoming more radical and violent. Revolutionary music, where several popular songs emerged during the French Revolution, most notably military anthem like La Marseillaise, written by Roger de Lisle in 1792, Caira, La Carmagnole, and others were also widely sung. Next. So, what was the transportation during the French Revolution? The next. Next. So as you can see in the picture, that was a stagecoach. Stagecoach was another form of transportation used during the French Revolution. It was a covered wagon that was used to carry passenger and goods and was four-wheel and usually was carried by about four horses or mules. The business and the act of traveling in a stage coach was called staging. Next. So for the next topic, let us know the historic French Revolution sites. The French Revolution started in 1789 when King Louis XVI and the French monarchy were overthrown. Next. Place de la Concorde. Place de la Concorde sits between Avenue des Champs-Élysées and Tuileries Garden. During the Revolution of King Louis XVI, his wife Marie Antoinette and other members of the French aristocracy were executed here by guillotine. Next. So as you can see in the picture, the first picture was King Louis XVI, the last king of the France before the fall of the monarchy during the French Revolution. And on the second picture, it was Marie Antoinette, the last queen of the France before the French Revolution. And for the third picture, it was the guillotine execution device. Next. Conciergerie. Once a palace during the Middle Ages, the Conciergerie was used as a prison during the French Revolution. Hundreds of prisoners were kept here, including Marie Antoinette, before being taken to the guillotine. Conciergerie is the revolutionary prison. The Conciergerie became one of the principal places of detention during the French Revolution. With the installation of the Revolutionary Court, it was most famous prisoner was Marie Antoinette. During the Restoration, a commemorative chapel was erected on the site of her cell. The meaning of concierge is the lodging or office of a concierge. Next. So we have Bastille. The storming of the Bastille took place on July 14, 1789, when the now gone medieval Bastille fortress was attacked by an angry mob. This surprise jump started the revolution. Although the building itself no longer stands, it's located on is marked by Place de la Bastille, a square that straddles the 4th, 11th, and the 12th arrondissements. Next. Angry Mob. On July 14, 1789, a state prison on the east side of Paris, known as the Bastille, was attacked by an angry and aggressive mob. The prison had become a symbol of the monarchy dictatorial rule, and event became one of the defining moments in the revolution that followed. Next. Les Invalides, a collection of museums relating to France's military history. Les Invalides is best known for housing the tomb of Napoleon Bonaparte. The gold dome des Invalides is a recognizable part of the Paris skyline. Next. So, as you can see in the picture, that is Napoleon Bonaparte, and he was a French military leader and emperor who conquered much of Europe in the early 19th century. Next. Next. Palace of Versailles. A revolution started in part because of the way French aristocrats lived in excess while many of their citizens starved. And this lavish style is on full display at the Palace of Versailles, where the king and queen lived. Palace of Versailles, former French royal residence and center of government, now a national landmark, it is located in the city of Versailles. And Yvelines Department, northern France, 10 miles, 16 kilometers west southwest of Paris. As the center of French court, Versailles was one of the grandest theaters of European absolutism. So the next reporter will be Catherine Rodrigo.
Thank you, Ms. Sales. The next topic is the hospitality during the French Revolution. The French Revolution brought the concept of the modern day restaurant that comes us from 18th century in Europe. And during this time, many chefs of Europe nobility were settling throughout the Europe. Next po. And prior to that, the French Revolution, only inns and the private residents were the public spaces that served food. Only what they called the chefs of this time period work in aristocratic household or the French nobility. These are the families who has a privileged social class in France from the Middle Ages until its abolition in June 23, 1790, during the French Revolution. They are what we call the upper class of people who has a rank or a title. And on the other hand, the French Revolution brought the fall of the upper class and the rise of the working class, leaving the private shops without employment. The shops began opening their own restaurants. A French word used to describe the bouillons served at taverns to restore the spirits and relieve ailments. Taverns is a place of business where people gather to drink alcohol beverages and be served food, and in most cases where travelers receive lodging. Next. At the late 1700s, the concept of the formal restaurants began in Europe during the French Revolution. The term restaurant first appeared in the 18th century in France. It referred on a reinvigorating meat broth which people ate to refortify the body. It was not until the French Revolution and subsequent industrialization that establishments such as we know them today began to appear and develop. Next book. The French Revolution was the turning point of the modern European history. It began in 1789 and ended with the ascension of the Napoleon Bonaparte in the late 1790s. During the period, French citizens revolted against the current political landscape, causing mass upheaval against the monarchy. Next po. The term restaurant, therefore, initially had a medical connotation, and the places that sold this healing broth in the 1760s were also called health houses. Next one. And of course, food is influenced by history, and as much as the vice versa. And the French Revolution was no exemption to that. According to Leroux's Gastronomique, the French Culinary Encyclopedia, although taverns, inns, and cafes had served food and drink to the public for centuries, the first restaurant is born. Next po. The first restaurant as we know it today opened in the Paris in 765 on the Rue de Folies, today the Rue de Louvre. On the front of the shop is engraved the Latin phrase from the Bible, Venit ad me omnes his stomacho laborates et ego vos restaurabo, which translates, "Come to me, whose stomachs aches, and I will restore you." At the time, clear soups such as those Bulanger sold were considered restorative, hence the term restaurant. Next. Anton Vieux was the one who founded Rue de Richelieu, which is the Grande Taverne de Londres that found in 1782. Next. And Paris became the center of the new restaurant scene, which to some degree it remains today. Next was the Hotel de Ville. Hotel de Ville is the site for the arrest and rebellion. French revolutionaries had successfully stormed the city prison, the infamous Bastille, and had taken its governor Bernard René Wardan, Marquess de Luanay, captive. Luanay was then taken by revolutionaries to the Hotel de Ville, where a furious mob assaulted him, beat him, and lynch him after stabbing him repeatedly with their bayonets and shooting him once. And then they were severed Luanay's head and placed it on a pike. Next. Other next notable event at the Hotel de Ville occurred several years later in July of 1794. At that time, the National Convention members were concerned for their own safety and conspired against those in charge of the reign of the terror. This is a period of violence that resulted in tens of thousands of people being executed as enemies of the revolution. Next. Maximilian Robespierre and his close supporters. They are considered responsible for the reign of the terror and believed to be the dangerous to certain National Convention members. During the coup d'état known as the Thermidorian reaction, Robespierre and some of his supporters, his brothers, sought safety at the Hotel de Ville. The convention considered them outlaws, and when the convention troops came to the Hotel de Ville to arrest them, some of men decided to kill themselves rather than to be captured. Since the since the French Revolution, other historic events have occurred at this site. Like for example, when preparation for the coronation of the emperor were being made, the Hotel de Ville was magnificently fitted out. Napoleon and Josephine were received in the transformed building. Another important incident was the proclamation delivered by the French Third Republic in 1870. The Second French Empire collapsed. And that would be all. Thank you.